Hello, everyone. I'm just going to give it a couple minutes for people to log in, and then we'll get started.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Connex, another Connex Connection event, and we're talking about compensation. We might even get to some total rewards in this conversation as well. And our hope here today is we can all walk away with some best practices, some keen insights, and then what I often find the most helpful from these sessions is what didn't work here in the last 6 months or a year that instead of spinning our wheels on, we can try some other things to move our practice moving forward. We're going to do introductions, but we're going to ask the question, and then as our panelists answer the question, they'll do their introductions of themselves. So we're going to start with Eric first. Eric, there's been so much energy around pay transparency. A lot of legislation. Seems like another state, another county, another city is implementing pay transparency. I think we're all moving in that direction. I know you have some very strong thoughts about pay transparency and how you're leveraging it in your organization.
Thank you, Phillip. So Eric Feinstein, I'm Chief People Officer at Navitus Health Solutions. We're based in Madison, Wisconsin. I actually live in St. Louis, Missouri, and then spend time up in Madison, a fair amount of time up in Madison. We're a pharmacy benefits management company, and we, like everybody, have been under a fair amount of pressure over at least the latter half of the pandemic around, attracting and retaining talent. We've grown north of 10% every year for the last 3.5 or 4 years since I've been here. And in that, we've needed to add a lot of talent, not just deal with the resignations that happened, especially in that latter half of the pandemic. And we made a decision about halfway through the pandemic to continue to sort of drive forward with the remote work. So while Wisconsin does not have pay transparency laws, we are confronted, like other organizations, with those laws. The other part of the context for what I'm about to share is that when I got here, and this is my first Chief People Officer role. Prior to this, I've spent most of my career in large organizations, large health systems, as VP of Total Rewards, and so I naturally kind of gravitated toward the compensation, picture at our organization, and found that we were pretty far behind market, and that only got worse as the pandemic began to get work a little bit worse around talent issues, as people were going back to work, and there was so much work available, remote work available, that you didn't have to get in your car and drive to work every day. So therefore, people in our world could work for companies out in California and make a lot more money, and the company in California could save a lot of money at the same time. So we began to deal with the resignations that I think most dealt with. And so I had to go through a lot of work to, ultimately get the organization to make investments in pay. And we made a number of them along the way but then as we began to see the pay transparency rules, together with the challenges of attracting and retaining, and this does get to maybe a question we'll talk about a little later today, around wage compression just to attract talent, it was necessary to double down on this. And so as we went down that path, a lot of updated and refreshed market pricing, looking not just at historical surveys, but trying to project where the talent market's going in various areas by talking with leaders and looking at what it's taking to attract, looking at job applications. And what I did ultimately, and I say I led this, but I have a team of great people who really did the work. And I went to the leadership team and went through all of what I just, all that context that I just shared, including what's happening in the pay transparency rules, and said, okay, we have to publish these ranges I am not an advocate of doing what a few organizations out there have done. I'm not saying it's wrong, but they published very, very wide ranges. Some have to say we're in compliance, even though we're really not giving because I believe that the spirit of those laws is to give people an idea of what the jobs should pay. And as we advertise, we're either going to, if we advertise ranges that are lower than what the market really is, what we know the market really is, we're going to lose candidate flow at a time when this company is growing fast. So I had that conversation with our executive team. I secured the investments necessary to get our current employees to market to avoid the compression and, frankly, the outburst that would happen if we posted ranges higher than what we were actually paying our current employees. And so the first thing we did was we dealt internally with our compensation challenges before and at the same time, and for the first time ever, we communicated pay ranges to our current employees so that they knew exactly where they were in the range. We communicated all the factors that we're considering around position and range. And after that was complete, then we began to go down the posting every job with the range on it. So we really thought carefully about that sequencing, to avoid talent disruption internally. I wish we could have gotten that money 2 years earlier and done it, but I think the takeaway, the key learning in this that we fortunately got right on it was to really deal with as much of your internal issues as you can before you have to deal with the external transparency laws. And there's, in my mind, we probably were a couple months late in that a lot of the transparency laws were effective either before 2023 or at 1/1/2023. And this was probably around March 1st. So I'll stop there, but answer any questions of my peers or let my peers just offer their perspective.
Well, Eric, it sounds like you took something that could have been very reactive and you made it a strategic priority within your organization. And so many of us, I think, have been challenged with wanting to meet those deadlines and still being able to connect with our own employees about it and have appropriate change management around it. So it sounds like you had an incredible holistic approach here, and it sounds like it was successful, right?
Yes, and may I offer one statistic in terms of the measure of success? So our turnover rate last year was 14%. We're at about 10.2 annualized this year. So we're less than that year to date, but I mean, annualized, we're running at about 10.2. A lot of organizations are seeing reductions in turnover, just the normal ebbs and flows in the economy and so forth. So some people, it's not just the compensation thing that we did. But what I can tell you is we track the source of turnover. And last year, 2022, 42% of our turnover had compensation, along with maybe other factors like I got the job of my dreams, and it happens to pay a lot more. But compensation was at least one of the factors. 42% of our turnover last year had that in it. And this year, we're at about 14% on that metric.
Wow.
So turnover's down, and the reason for turnover is different this year and is not related.
So for all the comp leaders out there, for all the chief people officers, as you're making this case internally, that is a great stat to cite as well. And Eric, thank you for sharing that. Ben, we're going to turn over to you. Again, we're on pay transparency, so feel free to introduce yourself and some of the successes or insights around pay transparency, maybe something that didn't work out here initially.
Sure. So Ben Hune, Vice President of Total Rewards for Health Edge Software. It's been a journey, I think, on pay transparency, and I agree with Eric. The intent or what we can interpret the intent to be behind the law is people to feel like they're being compensated fairly for the work that they do, and that employers aren't trying to hide or incentivize those differently within the same role doing the same job. So I think the intent is there, and what we have done differently is year over year we have a biannual promotion cycle, and we take that opportunity to assess internal equity concerns, pay equity concerns with regard to male, female. We take into consideration supervisor wage compression, and if in both of those cycles each year, try to close some of those gaps as much as possible across the organization. In addition to that, we're looking at do we have an opportunity to consolidate job titles in the organization? When you have like-to-like jobs that are so similar in title, those groups really should be viewed as peers. And how does that change the mix of pay equity amongst that group? So I think those proactive steps have put us in a really good place, similar to what Eric has talked about with the steps that they took to address internal equity before they kind of addressed the public-facing compliance side of it. We're doing those same steps on a regular basis, and now it's more about how do we want to publish those external ranges in a world where our office is fully remote. We're a national kind of pay scale, no geographic differentials by location, which is, I know, another topic we're going to get into. But in that world, do you lean more towards the location for the role that's being hired, or do you take the national average approach? So that's something we're kind of fleshing out as the next step in that journey.
And Ben, is there any stats or any numbers that you can share as far as successes that you've seen with around pay transparency?
Yeah, so we've certainly had reduced turnover, significant reduced turnover over the last few years. I think we were under trend in terms of during the Great Resignation time period, but now I think companies are really insulated from turnover because there's not a lot of jobs, there's not a lot of openings, so people are staying comfortable whether they are happy or not. And so we're kind of trying to capitalize on that market from a non-monetary standpoint right now, and focusing on recognition and how do we make people feel comfortable if they're here to stay, whether they like it or not. It's more of how do we engage them from that perspective so that they feel like they have job mobility, they have a career path, and somewhere that they're excited to work for. So that's been our focus.
Awesome. And last but not least, Jody, pay transparency.
Sure. So I'm Jody Kelly. I am the Vice President of Total Rewards for ESOB Corporation. That is a mid-cap global manufacturing, gas control, and fab tech company. So a little bit of a different space. And I would also say, just for context, we're in a little bit of a different place in our company life cycle as well, because we just spun off from our prior parent company in April of 2022. So I joined in the fall of 21 in preparation for that. Before that, I was in a completely different industry at a different company. So it's interesting how going through the same macro events can vary so widely industry to industry. And this is one of those examples. So slightly different, I think, from the perspective that each of you shared, Eric and Ben. What we chose to focus on was really around education to our associates, around what those published ranges really mean and what it means to them, right? We have historically very low turnover, generally speaking. And, I would love to say that we, did huge holistic reviews and some of what each of you did. That's amazing. But we were still stabilizing from our spinoff as well. And so what we really aim to do is to continue the work that we started in the comp space around competitive pay, internal equity, making sure that we're paying people fairly and competitively, but also to make sure they understand the value of those things. And so one of the pieces that we've opted to make sure that we highlight, and Eric, I think this overlaps a little bit with what you said, was one, we wanted to share a range that was a reasonable hiring range for most, right? Not necessarily min to max, but what is the reasonable range, barring exceptions, right? And then kind of add a note about those exceptions that ultimately, what we will ultimately offer really is based not only on the range that's published, but also on what the candidate brings to the table, right? Experience, skills, etc. And then also do that work to really begin educating our internal associates around how they should translate that to themselves. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that no two people's translations are the same. You can look at the same data and walk away with a completely different thought about it. And so it also overlapped with the same type of education we were doing around the difference between economic inflation and labor inflation. So this was really kind of a build on, really just trying to flex in and be more present from a total rewards perspective, and really kind of try to demystify some of the basics of comp, to be honest, for a multitude of reasons. So,
Jody, can I thank you for sharing that. Can I ask a very specific question? When you say educate the employees, who's doing that? Is that you, or is your team, or is it the managers? What does that look like?
A little of both, right? So, we obviously develop content, right? So it's more like a train the trainer content, right? We're making sure that number one, first and foremost, our colleagues within HR, especially the HR business partners that support the business units directly, really feel comfortable with, what we're doing, why we're doing it, how to help people relate to it, and how to answer those questions. We obviously flex in hotspots or in situations that are extraordinary, but we've really tried to first pour into HR, so almost like a TR for HR perspective, if you will, and then adding info sessions around major milestones and rollouts, right? When we roll out comp statements annually, let's add those info sessions or lunch and learns. Let's make sure folks really understand what they're looking at, what drove the results, how they can impact results going forward. It's not new, right? None of this is new, but it's constantly, what underpins it is constantly evolving, right? Yesterday, somebody might have cared because of inflation. Today, we're possibly facing a recession in certain parts of the world. So Ben, to your point, I think we have a little bit of a conservative outlook on movement, right? People don't want to be last in, first out, but you don't want quiet quitting or any of the, phrases du jour that really talk about disengagement, right? You really want people to feel good about where they work, what they do, and that they're being treated fairly and competitively. And so to me, the faucet's always on. It's just kind of, is the water cold or is it hot, right? And in this case, we were dealing both with inflation and hopefully kind of tying up the basics of that and going right into pay transparency, right? And I'm sure there'll be another one right around the corner, a new challenge to help demystify. So,
Hey, Phillip, if I could,
Yeah.
two things, but first, I've neglected to say anything about the education and training. I don't need to repeat what Jody said. I'll just say what Jody talked about was absolutely a step in the process to educate those managers and ultimately educate the population, but to make sure the managers were well educated and HR. The second thing I was going to offer takes us is still related but slightly different direction. So before I go there, I don't know if Ben had anything to add in response to Jody's comments.
No.
Okay, so the related but slightly different direction is, I have to believe, after what the audience has heard today, that there is more than one person sitting out there going, that's great and all what you all have said, where you dealt with your pay gap issues, but sorry, my company doesn't print money, and so we can't afford it. And so what I wanted to do is talk a little bit about the affordability piece of it, because I got to believe there are people in the audience who are thinking that as they heard what we said. I turned it on its head, and it depends on your organization and the context of your organization, of course. But as fast as we're growing, and we do not print money, we are absolutely a low margin PBM, fully transparent and full pass through to our customers. And so we just get an admin fee. And the margins on this business are very, very low. It's unique. I said, as fast as we're growing, we cannot afford not to get the talent, because we will take a hit in customer service and we'll lose clients. So I turned it upside down and said, we can't afford not to add the talent. Therefore, we can't afford not to do this. The question then becomes, where do I save money elsewhere, either within the labor cost structure or somewhere else in the business, but simply not paying the market and getting either talent that's not fully qualified to do these jobs. And that's the other thing I said was, you pay 85 or 90% of the market and you are getting 30% of the capability. You know, and the people who join your organization when you're paying that far below market are the people who don't have a job or can't get a job or lost a job, maybe have a little bit of experience, but they lost a job and something looks a lot better than zero. And so you are buying the wrong talent when you do that. And so I really turned that whole "we don't have the money to do it" conversation into a "we can't afford not to do this." And then how do we pay for it became the secondary thing. And within the total reward structure, there often are opportunities out there. You just have to push the gas pedal a little bit as it relates to the volume of work that you take on in a given period, because you might have to run an RFP to look at your health plan or, you know, some other aspect of your total rewards to get money. But there often is money if you kind of go look for it. So just there's a point at which I know budget becomes a major issue, but you know, somehow that has to be solved for, and that's really the thing I pushed.
Eric, can I ask, was there any balancing that you had to do within your organization?
So we went to the board and had the conversation with the board about the X million dollars that we were going to need to spend on compensation, and that we had no choice. We're growing at a certain pace, got to get the staff, got to take the margin down for a period of time until we get the revenue. So we did not end up cutting. We ended up doing some things in 2024 with our benefits to reduce costs, specifically raising some premiums and deductibles. We have a lot of headroom because we're located in Madison, which is like Madison, Wisconsin, is like a bubble that doesn't exist in the rest of this country in terms of being in a state government city with very rich local benefits, to where we had such rich benefits that we had some room where we could actually move the dial a little bit and still attract talent, especially given that we're recruiting nationally now. So
Awesome.
we did a little bit on the benefit side, but it's a little bit of a delayed effect because we moved the comp much faster.
And one last follow-up question. You had incredible turnover reduction success. Were you able to leverage that at all in your cost analysis?
Well, we didn't try to promise we're going to get this much less turnover and this is what it costs to bring on an FTE. We certainly alluded to the fact that that is a qualitative benefit to us, because it takes, especially when you think of like you bring in a software developer in any organization, and the first thing they have to do is learn the business and all of the existing infrastructure where they can really make a dent in, sort of advancing that infrastructure to, whatever that next level is that you're trying to get to. So there's always that conversation about it takes months before people are highly productive. And so that did come up, but we didn't sit around and say, okay, and per FTE, this is what it's going to save us by retaining, because that requires you to make assumptions about what you're going to retain. And sometimes those numbers, I've done that before, those numbers actually get so big that people have a hard time believing it. And you can, if you're not careful, lose credibility rather than gain it. So if you want to do that, I think my advice, because I've been down that road, is to be really conservative with your assumptions and still show some ROI and have that conversation more at the qualitative level with a little bit of just back of the envelope. Hey, if we just save this, much turnover, this is what's going to happen.
Ben and Jody, so Eric just shared a really good example of having to go to the board and talk about, kind of flipping the script, so to speak. Any experience doing that here in the last couple of years around compensation?
I'll take it. So for my org, when I joined, it's this microcosm of different situations. They had just acquired 3 different organizations that all had different comp philosophies. We had some groups that had an annual bonus structure, some that did not. Some groups had sales incentive plans, some did not. So there was this very disparate approach. And a decision along the way was made before I started, to only offer bonus for new hires coming in at directors and above. But they didn't take the time to solve for the internal employees that were at those levels that didn't have a bonus. So then you had new hires coming in that didn't have targets. So we initially went down the road of coming up with what we could do to solve that over a 3-year time period. Do we break it into chunks where we say we're going to do senior director to EVP in year 1, director, senior manager in year 2, manager and individual contributors in year 3, and how do we kind of close that gap to be more in line with market? And then how do we mold kind of our pay philosophies across those 3 groups to be consistent and have one strategy going forward? So we did initially go to the board, to the comp committee, to ask for an investment to solve that 3-year approach, and had to turn around in the Great Resignation time period and go back and say, I know we asked for a 3-year approach and I know you were aligned with it, but can we actually do it in 1 because of the time period we're in? So we ended up having to pivot, seeing what was coming around the corner, knowing that we were going to lose that talent, go back to them and say, we'll have to worry about it on the back end in terms of, to Eric's point, the margins, but we need to make sure that we're taking care of our people, because the cost to lose this critical talent to the business, especially when you're talking about those senior leadership roles, it's invaluable to the business, continuing to be successful. So we definitely, had a whirlwind experience over the past couple of years with that. But it's proven to be successful. We're now in line with market. We have an annual bonus program. People are happy with it. It is still a journey in terms of, your individual contributors are the largest population. They're going to take the biggest chunk of time and investment to get right. But it doesn't have to be kind of all at once, rip the Band-Aid and here's a $9 million investment. We did it over time and did our best to phase it in so that it's something that they can feel good about, both the company and the employees, that the company chose this time to really invest in the employees despite the economic tailwinds, So that was our approach of kind of when that came up.
Jody?
Sure, yeah. So Ben and Eric, I noticed some similarities in certain points of what each of you said to my own experience. And I think a couple of things here, because we're global and we span all different types of roles, right? From frontline manufacturing through the CEO, R&D, scientists, engineers, etc. And we're literally all over the world. We also have a highly acquisitive background as well. So we have pockets where the work continues and that journey continues. I'm convinced it will never end. It just winds and twists. But, I would say, what we did was a little bit different than what I heard each of you recount. And that is, we were courageous on price, where we could be to offset certain things. And then now, especially this year, as we're looking toward, recession and recession projections in, portions of our footprint, we're not going to rely on price to offset. And really, we're prioritizing and looking elsewhere within Total Rewards, not just as for an offset, but actually to deliver on a value proposition in totality, right? There are definitely some places where we have a strong footprint that are just incredibly competitive with inflation that doesn't seem to want to quit, right? And we've been forced to kind of rethink how we're going to participate in that race, right? Because the reality is, our total revenue for the year is a rounding error for some of the big guys. We can't continue to compete with them dollar for dollar forever. And so really, what is it that we're going to offer to our associates and would-be associates that gives them a desirable value proposition in totality? And Eric, I think you kind of gave a nod to this early on in the call that, while this panel is really focused on compensation, the reality is there are many levers across total rewards that can really be meaningful for associates, and it's important not to forget those, right? Even in countries where there is socialized medicine, there are still opportunities to add top-up or experience-based benefits that are high ROI for a company. It means a lot to the employee. It's not terribly expensive, and it's a big win, right? And then weave in things like, on-site perquisites or just the general feel to culture and engagement initiatives, right? It really does in this time frame, I guess, where we have all sorts of macro challenges that come out of nowhere. It's really important to kind of lock arms across all programming and really try to think in totality. Like if I was starting here today, what would I want? What would engage me, right? And so it's super important. Comp is always important. It is. It's the lowest scoring questions on a survey from associates, right? It's just a tricky area, but I think, looking in totality is just as important. So that's where we've done that, just where we have kind of high pressure spaces. And then in others, we've said, okay, if you only have so many dollars and you're not willing to allow me to flip the script, you're not hearing it, then let's talk about prioritizing your high potentials, your high performing, those in critical or niche roles. Let's make sure, that we're really, let's make sure we understand where we are to market. Let's prioritize those that, for one reason or another may not be where they should be. Maybe we acquired them and we have some work to do, right? Same thing with incentives, very similar to you, Ben. We have pockets where it's like, gosh, there's no reason for these people to come in and be anything other than a warm body. That's not great. They should have an incentive, right? And so our work continues in that space, but it's been a mix. It really depends on the country. I would say in the US, of course, it's a continuing story of looking for savings opportunity in the benefits space, right? It's just such an expensive line item. And there are opportunities around every corner there. It's just, it's tough to manage because I feel like with employees, it's a complicated space. It's an expensive space. So anytime we make changes, there's a lot of change management and communication that needs to go into it. Maybe that's just me coming out of closing open enrollment yesterday, but we did a lot of that, and it was an answer to our associate survey, and we saw some positive results, but we also saw savings that we could lock in for 3 years, and in certain places where we RFP'd, we knew we needed to do the work. So.
Congratulations on another open enrollment. And Jody, we'll ask the next question of you. And I think we've all alluded to it, but I just want to lock this down. So how are we dealing with the hybrid and the remote workers when it comes to geographical differences in pay? How does your organization address that?
Sure. So we have locations all over the world, and many of our employees are kind of tethered to those locations, right? And for those that are tethered to a location, we base our structures and our cost of living premiums on work location. For those roles that are historically always remote, like sales roles, field sales, territory sales, their home becomes their work location. So that's what we have in there. And we we rebuilt our structures to have, we use national market data, obviously, as the anchor, and then we apply cost of living, premium and discount where that's appropriate all across the world, and then also hot job premium and discount. So it's not anything new, but it is just, I think, a slight reinvention of how we look at how somebody should be paid. And that's really, kind of giving a nod to using work location to capture where they are and then making the decision there. So, in my past life before I moved here, there was a different approach. So I know there are many ways to slice that. That seems to work for us for now. But of course, we're always poised to be agile if we need to be. But so far, it's working.
And Ben, remind me, you guys are using the national rate for all of your remote workers?
Yeah, so I like Jody had pretty much my whole career focused around geographic differentials and taking the national average and adding a premium, especially in a global workforce. That methodology can work anywhere. In a post-COVID world where I was fortunate enough to switch industries during that time period and went from low profit margin food service industry to tech. Tech, obviously, money doesn't grow on trees, but they certainly have a little bit more wiggle room. And so with that, there was this focus around the employee experience. It was almost like a lot of employers woke up to the fact that I suddenly have this huge talent pool that I can pull from because I don't have to focus on my specific city where my headquarters is located or where we have offices. And oh, by the way, we can reduce that footprint and not have that office space anymore. So with that, we really stuck to a national average and flipped it so that if the employee feels that they're currently, based in San Francisco and they want to move to Boise, Idaho, or Des Moines, Iowa, somewhere where the cost of labor, the cost of living is significantly less, that's a benefit to them, and we're not going to reduce their pay. And so that is something that we've had success in. So employees feel empowered. We have a big migration of people from New York to Florida, places where there's no state income tax. India, we had people move, out of those greater cost of living areas as well. So we've seen pretty good success with that model. It means that the conversation shifts from kind of what we're paying geographically and the premium if we're hiring for roles out of New York City or San Francisco to a localized approach of, to get this talent in the door, they're specifically at this comp set, as long as it's within the national range and we take those kind of conversations into consideration, it's worked really well for us. So then the conversation is moving towards more of a skills-based conversation. So when you're talking software engineers, if they have, for example, an outdated language that they're uniquely familiar with that not a lot of talent has, then you're going to have to pay a premium on that job for that particular talent set. So that's the kind of conversation we're having now. Obviously, it's really dependent on how your board, how your CEO and leadership team views remote work, and if they'll continue to support that long term. And as Jody mentioned, being agile in our structures so that we're not caught flat-footed in the event that shifts, because the pendulum can easily swing the other way, and a lot of companies are going back into the office. So you need to be prepared for both models, but luckily we've had success with the national approach.
And Eric, remind us your approach at your organization.
We're actively looking at it. Our starting place has been over the last several years that we're looking and using national data. When you look at national data against where we are in Wisconsin, it's actually fairly comparable. So we've sort of started with that. But there are pockets of our operation where people have to be on site. And we're looking very specifically at certain jobs that then are on site in those locations. So for instance, we have a pharmacy, a specialty pharmacy down in Southern California. With the latest California laws where restaurant workers, I believe, are going to be moving to $20. Healthcare workers are going to be pushed up to 25, I think, within the next several years. We're getting a lot of pressure there on farm techs. So we are working on, where we're going to have to do differentials, and the same with farm techs, not because of laws, but because of just supply demand, labor supply demand in Phoenix. Pharmacy technicians are so where we've got those operations and where we have the need, we are doing it now. We're studying the issue more broadly, but our bias is to look at national data and and knowing its alignment to where most of our employees are. We're sort of sticking with it. We'll live with not getting some talent in higher cost markets rather than paying more to get them to hire a remote worker. And we're not taking anything away if it's a lower cost market. We're not taking anything away from them. So,
Phillip, can I ask a question of Ben?
Yeah, please.
Awesome. Hey, Ben, what do you do when you're hiring someone in, or how has it pressure tested your structure to hire someone in those traditionally higher cost of living areas like San Fran or New York, et cetera? Do you find that you may have to make an exception and go outside of the range if you want the certain level, caliber of talent that you're seeking?
Just tell your talent acquisition team not to hire in California. No, that would be the easy answer.
Yeah.
No, I think we honestly haven't had that occur. So, if you take San Francisco, they would have traditionally been on a 25% premium over the national average, right? Sometimes, more. And you take those areas. A lot of, honestly, just with the economy where it is, a lot of those folks are migrating out of that area. And so we haven't really seen that specific skill set and that specific talent is only geographically located in those areas. So I honestly haven't hit any of those roadblocks. But I think, given that there's not that kind of volume of those one-off situations, if it were to occur, I think it would just be, an honest conversation of where we meet someone in the range, and we would, if that's the right talent and that's where they're located, then we're going to pay what we need to pay to make sure that we get the right talent in the door. So I think there's always flexibility for making sure that, we're meeting the needs of the business. But ultimately, I think by and large, our national approach has been successful that way.
Gotcha. I just wondered. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no, of course.
Yeah. And Phillip, the other thing I just want to say before we move on is, the other piece of this, and it kind of addresses one of the questions in the chat, is that I am finding, especially in countries or locations where, as a general trend, people are going back to the office, we continue to find that offering a hybrid work arrangement as a company in general is still a very positive, and valuable benefit to employees, right? And we definitely have made that stand. So, I know that there are different industries, different countries, different companies that are shifting gears, but we've chosen to kind of, draw a line in the sand, and it's kind of right in the middle, right? Where we not only do we allow, but, we support actively, having a hybrid work arrangement. So I'm not sure, if Eric or Ben, you guys have a different experience there, but I would say from what other levers can you pull, that's definitely still one of them, right?
Yeah, and that's a great point, Jody. We, as I mentioned, have embraced the remote work. And it's a whole nother conversation around how do you manage that. And there was a lot of discussion about that, or at least some discussion about that yesterday in the performance management. So we won't go there, but we've embraced that. And you're right, it is an attractive feature for a lot of people. So our applicant flows have been great.
Well, guys, we got about 4 minutes left, so we're going to do what they call in college football a run-pass option here. So I would like to shift us to incentives, unless you have something burning that you want to share with the group. Eric, what's your current approach with incentives at your organization?
We have an incentive plan. We align it, like most do, to strategic priorities of the business, set by the board or approved, our strategic priorities of the board. We are not really, the only thing that we're changing as we've grown and as we've added some subsidiaries that are in businesses that are tangent to what we do or adjacent to what we do, that creates a level of complexity that this organization that I'm in hasn't seen, but I've been in, other like complex health systems, is how do you align pay and performance of what's controllable or at least impact, what people can impact. So if you're sitting in a subsidiary, having one set of corporate goals at the enterprise level is getting to be unacceptable as we've added subsidiary businesses. So we're working on a model where we blend enterprise and entity specific performance measures to make sure that there's better line of sight. But we have not backed off or adjusted our plans in terms of award opportunity and funding and those kinds of things.
And Ben, how about you? Any changes to your incentive plan here lately?
Yeah, we're slowly introducing complexity each year. I don't want to hit them with, every single department that you're in is a certain percentage based on their performance of their OKRs or what have you. So we're slowly building it, that muscle, upskilling the managers to really understand how to allocate funds when it comes to the discretionary portion of the bonus. And so our incentive plans just this year are adding a portion of the bonus that is tied to the individual business unit that they're in and how the performance of that business compares to the rest of the organization from the company performance standpoint. And we're going to build on that over time. So our goal this coming next year is to tie in metrics that are on diversity and training and upskilling of the organization and how managers are supporting that. What's their manager effectiveness scores and the engagement surveys, things like that. We're going to slowly start to tie and put our money where our mouth is in terms of the bonus structure. And so that's something that we've been working on to slowly add in complexity once they fully understand how the system, the plan rather works.
Awesome. Jody, how about you?
Sure. I'll take a slightly different tack. We have several incentives in place, some for sales. We have some profit sharing plans in countries where it's mandated. For probably our largest plan as far as number of participants that it spans, it is a blend of individual and company performance. And by company performance, it could be, the business unit in which the person is assigned, right? Or a region. I think, for us, just as important is as plan design is helping people understand how they can drive the results and helping them understand where they stand mid-cycle, right? So, you've got somebody who says, okay, how do I affect EBITDA? Like, I'm just going to do my thing and hope for the best, right? Helping to share examples for how somebody that maybe is not a direct revenue generator can help drive those results on profit. And then also having at least one, a mid-cycle check-in on where are we to kind of add that momentum back in cycle to go, hey, we're doing great on EBITDA. We really need to really sharpen our focus on working capital turns or whatever it is, right? The reality is most folks may not really fully comprehend what those metrics in the plan are. So helping them understand it and helping them understand where they are in relation to the finish line is super key, I think, in driving the behaviors that you really want to see, right?
Awesome. Well, this has been an incredible panel. As I reflect back on the last couple of years of we've been coming out of COVID, we had all the legislation around pay transparency. We had the Great Resignation. And I can tell you we have had to lean on our compensation leaders more than ever. And I want to thank all three of you for your leadership in this space and everybody else that's tuning in. Just incredible insights that you've shared with them. And hopefully there's some key takeaways that they're going to be able to leverage in their organization. So we're at time, and I just want to thank everybody again and have a great rest of your sessions today.